Picture this. It's a cold winter's night in South Wales. The darkness has fallen early, as it does in December. You're inside your home, perhaps gathered around the fire with family, when suddenly you hear singing outside your door. Then comes a knock. You look through the window and see a haunting silhouette. A horse's skull, ribbons streaming from it, its jaw clicking open and closed. Fari Lwyd has arrived. Fari Lwyd is one of Wales' most distinctive and eerie folk customs. The name most likely translates to Grey Mare, though its etymology has been debated by folklorists. This wassailing tradition involves a real horse's skull mounted on a pole, carried from door to door during the Christmas season, and it represents a fascinating window into Welsh cultural history. The first written record of Fari Lwyd appears in 1800 in J. Evans' book A Tour Through Part of North Wales. However, the tradition is believed to be much older. While some folklorists once speculated about pre-Christian Celtic origins, modern scholars are more cautious about such claims due to lack of concrete evidence. What we do know is that by the 19th century, Fari Lwyd was thriving, particularly in South Wales. It was especially popular in Glamorgan, Monmouthshire, and Carmarthenshire. The boom years for the tradition were between 1850 and 1920, when numerous Fari Lwyd groups operated throughout these regions. Fari Lwyd shares similarities with other British hooded animal customs, such as the hoodening tradition in Kent, the Broad in the Cotswolds, and the Old Tup in Derbyshire. These traditions often involved groups of people, sometimes the poor, using entertainment with a touch of menace to gather food and money during the harsh winter months. Fari Lwyd itself is a striking creation. A real horse's skull forms the head, not just any decoration, but an actual skull that communities would obtain from local farmers. This skull would be mounted on a pole and elaborately decorated with colorful ribbons and rosettes. The eyes were often replaced with glass bottles, or in later years, baubles that would catch the light. The lower jaw was ingeniously fixed on a spring mechanism, allowing the carrier to make it snap shut with a loud, startling click. A long white sheet would be draped from the skull down over the person carrying it, completely concealing them from view and creating the impression of a ghostly horse moving through the streets. Between performances, the skull was carefully preserved. It would be buried in lime for most of the year, then ceremonially dug up each December, ready for another season of visits. While some groups used wooden heads or other materials, and one account from the 1930s mentions boys in Swansea using a pillow, the authentic horse skull was the characteristic and preferred form. Fari Lwyd custom typically began at dusk and often lasted late into the night. A group of men would carry the Mari through the streets of their village, singing and dancing. Fari Lwyd wasn't alone in her travels. Depending on the area and the size of the wassailing party, she would be accompanied by an array of stock characters with names like Punch and Judy, borrowed from the Italian commedia dell'arte tradition, as well as the sergeant and the merryman, who played music and entertained. When the group arrived at a house or pub, they would stand at the door and begin singing traditional songs, requesting entry. This is where the tradition becomes truly unique. What followed was called the Pwn Co, an improvised contest of rhyming verses between Fari Lwyd party and the inhabitants of the house. The door would remain closed during this exchange, which could last for a considerable time, sometimes even an hour or more. The verses were performed in Welsh and were typically mischievous, full of good-natured mockery, with both sides poking fun at each other's singing ability, supposed drunkenness, and various character flaws. The contest would continue until one side ran out of verses and gave up. Eventually, the householders would relent and allow Fari and her party inside. This was considered auspicious. Letting Fari Lwyd in was believed to bring good luck to the household for the coming year. However, once inside, the Mari became quite mischievous. She would chase people around the house, particularly young women, snap her jaw at guests, and even try to steal things. The leader would make a show of trying to restrain her. The party would be rewarded with food and drink, and sometimes monetary gifts. The visit would conclude with a traditional farewell song, and Fari would move on to the next house. The 20th century saw a significant decline in Fari Lwyd tradition. Several factors contributed to this. The rise of Welsh Methodism and other Christian non-conformist movements in the 19th century had already cast a disapproving eye on the custom. Baptist minister Reverend William Roberts called it sinful in his book The Religion of the Dark Ages, attempting to stamp it out as a relic of paganism. However, in an ironic twist, Roberts's book actually preserved the tradition. He transcribed 20 verses of the Mari's performance so his congregation would recognize and avoid it, but these verses became a valuable record that later enthusiasts used to revive the practice. The decrease in Welsh speakers also played a role in the tradition's decline, as the Pum Co was almost always conducted in Welsh. By the 1930s and 1940s, folklorist Iorwerth Pate found the practice still alive in Cardiff, Bridgend, Llangenwyd, Neath, and other parts of Glamorgan, but fears were growing that it might disappear entirely. By the mid-20th century, Fari Lwyd sightings were rare. However, the tradition never completely died. Beginning in the 1960s, revival efforts began, particularly through folk clubs and museums. The town of Llangenwyd became an important center for the tradition's continuation, and a local family at their inn has now reached their third generation of hosting Fari Lwyd. Today, Fari Lwyd is experiencing a renaissance. St. Fagan's National Museum of History near Cardiff hosts regular Fari Lwyd events where people of all ages can participate. The tradition has evolved to be more inclusive. No longer limited to groups of men, women and children now join in the celebrations. Fari Lwyd Maris vary in their construction. Some groups still use real horse skulls, while others create heads from papier-mâché or cardboard, making the tradition more accessible and appropriate for younger participants. The decorations have become more elaborate and creative, with some incorporating ancient Celtic runic symbols, evergreen plants for manes, and increasingly artistic designs. The tradition has spread beyond its historical heartland, appearing in towns and villages across Wales during the winter season. Fari Lwyd has become a powerful symbol of Welsh cultural identity, representing the resilience of tradition, the importance of the Welsh language, and the strength of community bonds. In bringing together music, poetry, humor, food, and a touch of the supernatural, Fari Lwyd continues to serve its ancient purpose, bringing light, luck, and laughter to communities during the darkest days of winter, while connecting the present generation to their ancestors and to each other. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious.